It was a quiet Thursday morning in Lagos. The sky was cloudy, and the air was cool. Peter Obi sat at his office desk, looking through some papers. He had just finished a long meeting with his team. The meeting was about farming in Nigeria. They had discussed how to help small farmers grow more food and earn more money. Peter was tired, but he felt good. He believed that Nigeria could grow better if the people were supported, especially the poor and the farmers. He often said, "A nation that cannot feed itself is not truly free." After the meeting, he asked for a cup of tea. He liked tea in the morning, not too hot, just warm enough to make him feel calm. As he sipped slowly, he looked through some emails. Most of them were normal messages, invitations, news, and some reports. Nothing too special. Just then, his assistant, Chika, walked into the room holding a white envelope. She looked a little curious. "Good morning, sir," she said, handing it to him. "This just arrived by courier. It's from Burkina Faso." Peter looked up, surprised. "Burkina Faso? Are you sure?" Chika nodded. "Yes, sir. The stamp is from Ouagadougou, the capital." Peter took the envelope and turned it over in his hands. It had a clean seal and neat handwriting. His name was written clearly, Mr. Peter Obi. He had never received a personal letter from Burkina Faso before. In fact, he hadn't had much contact with their government at all. He wondered who it could be. Maybe a student? A fan? Or someone needing help? He carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear it. Inside was a neatly folded letter. The paper felt thick and clean, like an important message. As he unfolded it, he read the first few lines. His eyes stopped at the signature at the bottom. He sat up straight. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. Peter blinked twice. He looked again. Yes, it was real. The letter was from the president of another African country. His hands paused for a moment. Why would the president of Burkina Faso be writing to him? He looked at Chika, still standing there. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Please give me a moment." She nodded and left the room. Peter turned back to the letter and stared at it. His heart was now beating faster than before. He had received letters from many people in Nigeria, and sometimes from Nigerians abroad. But this was different. This was from a fellow African leader. Something important was inside. He could feel it. He took a deep breath and began to read. The first lines were polite and formal. "Dear Mr. Peter Obi, I hope this letter meets you well. I am writing to you with great respect, not just as a fellow African, but as someone who sees hope in your words and actions." Peter blinked. This was serious. This was not a fan letter. This was from someone who had taken time to think and write carefully. The letter continued. "My name is Captain Ibrahim Traoré. I am the president of Burkina Faso. I took time to watch some of your speeches, read your interviews, and study your ideas. I am a young leader, like many others in Africa today, trying to change the story of our continent." Peter stopped reading for a moment. He had heard of Traoré before. A young army captain who became president during a difficult time in his country. Some said he was bold. Others called him a revolutionary. But he was still very young, in his 30s, and full of passion for Africa. Peter returned to the letter. "In Burkina Faso, we are fighting not just against terrorism, but also against poverty, bad leadership, and the loss of African dignity. I see that in your own country, Nigeria, you speak about the same things: honesty, development, care for the poor, and service to the people. That is why I am writing to you today. Not as a politician, but as a brother." Peter leaned back in his chair. He felt both shocked and humbled. A sitting African president had written to him, not to ask for help, not to complain, but to connect. The letter wasn't long, but every word had meaning. Ibrahim Traoré went on to say, "Africa does not need strong men with guns. Africa needs strong hearts, clean hands, and wise voices. I believe you are one of those voices. We may not agree on everything, but I believe we both love Africa." Peter smiled a little. These were simple words, but they carried deep truth. The letter ended with hope. "One day, I hope we can sit down, not as presidents or candidates, but as African sons, and speak freely about our dreams. I believe in the Africa that is coming. I believe you do too." Then, under the last line, was a clear signature. Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition, Burkina Faso. Peter sat still. He stared at the letter for a long time. He read it again, this time slowly. It was not a message for the public. It was personal. It was real. And it touched him deeply. This young man in a small West African country had been watching him. Not as a fan, but as a fellow leader trying to do good. He felt many things at once: surprise, respect, and a deep sense of connection. He had often felt alone in his fight for better leadership in Nigeria. But now, he knew someone else out there was thinking the same way. And that person had reached out, with no pride, no politics, just honesty. Peter folded the letter gently. He placed it on the table beside him. Then he looked out the window. He did not say a word, but his heart was full. Something was changing. Africa was waking up, not just in Nigeria, but in Burkina Faso too. Peter Obi sat quietly in his office, still holding the letter from Ibrahim Traoré. Even though he had already read it twice, he wanted to read it again. There was something about the words that touched his heart. It didn't feel like a normal letter between politicians. It felt like something deeper, like a message from one soul to another. Peter looked at the paper and thought about the man who wrote it. Ibrahim Traoré was not an ordinary leader. He became president of Burkina Faso at a young age, during a very hard time. His country was facing violence, fear, and poverty. Yet, he stood up and said, "Enough." He wanted to take back his country from those who had forgotten the people. Just like Peter always said, leadership is about service, not power. As he stared at the letter, Peter began to think more deeply. Why had this letter touched him so much? Why did it feel so personal? Maybe it was because he, too, had walked a hard road. He had lost elections. He had been insulted, attacked, misunderstood. But still, he never gave up. He continued to speak with courage. He always told people, if you want to lead the people, you must love them. Now, here was another African leader, far away, saying the same thing. Peter thought of something Traoré had written. Africa does not need strong men with guns. Africa needs strong hearts, clean hands, and wise voices. That line kept echoing in his mind. It was true. For too long, Africa had been led by force, fear, and corruption. But now, a new voice was rising, the voice of truth, love, and unity. And this letter proved it. Peter stood up and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the city was busy. Cars moved up and down the road. People were rushing to work. Children in school uniforms walked with their parents. He thought about the future of these children. Would they grow up in a better Africa? Would they see leaders who serve with love and truth? Would they one day read about people like Traoré and believe that change is possible? Peter whispered to himself, "We cannot fail them." He turned back to his desk and looked again at the letter. There was one more part that made him smile. "One day, I hope we can sit together, not just to talk about politics, but to dream about a new Africa where every child can go to school. Every farmer can feed his family, and every leader walks with clean hands." That was the dream. That was the Africa both men wanted. An Africa where young people don't have to run to Europe. An Africa where elections are fair. An Africa where leaders do not steal, but give. An Africa that is proud, united, and peaceful. Peter sat back down and rested his hands on the table. For years, he had spoken about this dream, sometimes wondering if anyone was listening. Now he knew someone was. Not just anyone, but a president. A fellow African. A brother. The letter reminded him that he was not alone in this journey. Others were rising too. Others were ready to fight for what was right. He felt a fire in his heart, not of anger, but of hope. Hope that Africa was changing. Hope that the next generation would see a better day. Peter Obi smiled softly. This was more than a letter. It was a sign. A message of hope, not just for him, but for all of Africa. Peter Obi sat still for a long time. The letter from President Ibrahim Traoré was now folded on the table beside him. But his mind was still full of the words. He could not forget them. He looked out the large window in his office. The sky had cleared, and the sun was now shining. From where he sat, he could see the tops of buildings, moving cars, and people walking on the busy streets of Lagos. But his thoughts were far away, not in Lagos, not even in Nigeria, but in Burkina Faso. Something inside Peter had changed. This was not a normal morning anymore. This was not just another day filled with meetings and calls. This morning had given him something new. A feeling he had not felt in a long time. It was more than surprise. It was more than respect. It was hope, real hope. He thought about all the times people had laughed at him when he spoke about good leadership. He remembered the debates, the insults on social media, the lies told about him during elections. He had often felt alone, like he was standing in the middle of a storm, holding only his truth. But now, someone else, someone from far away, had written to say, "I see you. Keep going." That meant more than votes. It meant more than fame. It meant that the truth was not wasted. He stood up again, slowly. He walked to a small shelf in the corner of his office, where he kept books, awards, and a few personal things. There was an empty space at the top. He picked up the letter and placed it there, standing upright. It was not just paper. It was a symbol, a reminder that across borders, across languages, the spirit of good leadership was growing. Peter turned and looked at his desk. It was full of papers and plans. Plans to improve education. Plans to reduce poverty. Plans to support small businesses. He smiled. None of it would be easy. But now, he felt stronger. Because now, he knew that others were fighting the same fight. Others were dreaming the same dream. He sat down and picked up a pen. He opened his notebook and began to write. Not a speech. Not a plan. But a reply, a letter back to Ibrahim Traoré. He wrote slowly, with care. Dear President Traoré, thank you for your kind and powerful words. Your letter gave me strength. It reminded me that truth still matters, and that Africa is not sleeping, it is waking up. He paused, then continued. We may not lead in the same way. We may have different paths. But we share the same dream, to see our people free, fed, and full of hope. I would be glad to meet one day, to talk not about power, but about purpose. He signed the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it in an envelope. He gave it to his assistant and said, "Please send this to Ouagadougou. Use the fastest and safest method. This one is important." She looked at him and smiled. "Yes, sir. I'll handle it right away." Peter leaned back in his chair again. For the first time in many months, he felt light. Not because his problems were gone, they were still there. But because he now felt connected to something bigger. It was like two lights in the dark had found each other. And when two lights meet, the darkness becomes weaker. He whispered to himself once more. Maybe, just maybe, Africa is waking up. That thought stayed with him all day. In every meeting, every phone call, every small decision, it stayed. It gave him peace. It gave him power. Not the kind of power that controls others, but the kind of power that lifts people. That brings change. That gives life. Peter Obi knew the road ahead was still long. He knew there would still be fights, noise, and disappointment. But now, he also knew something else. He was not walking alone. And that made all the difference.